Welcome back to the Livingston Parish News Weekly Podcast. My name is McHugh David, publisher and editor of the news. Appreciate you joining us today. If you're checking us out, we are talking about school construction, specifically new school construction here in Livingston Parish. A lot of complicated factors that go into it. Actually, I should say it's a complicated scenario with a lot of just individual factors that lead into it. It became a point of contention here in Livingston Parish after it was announced that two new schools, one mega campus for Southside Junior High and Elementary on one location just south of the interstate on Pete's Highway, as well as a brand new Denham Springs Elementary, both sort of cropped up and were being discussed. Declared substantially damaged after the Great Flood. And then, it was announced, okay, we're going to build these new schools. They're going to be modern. They're going to be this. They're going to be that. And a lot of people in other areas of the parish started to get a little upset. Well, what about us? So it's important, first and foremost, to take those scenarios, which is Denham Springs Elementary and Southside Junior High and Elementary Mega Campus, separate those out. Those are the result of a natural disaster. The school system worked through HUD and FEMA to get those funded. They're 100% funded. Anything that goes over the approved cost will come out of Denham Springs' portion of their tax collection, which is how these new schools are funded. That's the part we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about new school construction here in Livingston Parish that is not the result of a disaster, but the result of what is basically hyper-local tax collection. So let's get started. It's interesting, and if you were reading, I've gotten this out a little late, but if you were reading last Thursday, October 31st paper, you will have read pretty much everything there is to say about this, and that is that there are three tax collections on the books which fund each individual high school as well as Frost. So that's 10 areas that are being considered as we go round out this discussion, I guess you can say. And, it's best also to begin here. The state of Louisiana is one of the only states in the union. I think there are a couple of others, but it's pretty solo in this. There is no dedicated fund for new school construction, none whatsoever. So the entirety of the burden is placed upon these locales where these schools are located and the tax collections they have there. The school system currently has three taxes that it utilizes to build new schools. There's two sales taxes, which they have combined into one. That's called the 1.5 cent sales tax. There is also a 7 mil maintenance fund, as well as a 5 mil construction fund. So all three of these funds combine to form what is a pool of money for a district to do construction, renovation, that sort of thing. Well, in the modern world, the cost of building a new school very much outweighs those tax collections, and we'll talk about that later in this podcast. But it's not enough. So what you'll see is that a lot of individual school districts have, I guess you can say, attached or applied a new millage or a fourth tax collection base through a vote of the people, and then they bond that tax collection out over a certain amount of time to build these new structures. And we'll talk about who has what in a minute. First, let's discuss this part. Not including the $75,000 for homestead exemption, you're looking at this for the property tax value in each individual high school district plus Frost. Denham Springs leads the way with $298.7 million. Walker comes in second at $207.1 million. Live Oak third with $111.4 million. Actually, it's more like $111.5 million. Albany fourth with $45 million. Springfield fifth with $43 million. Doyle and French Settlement are both pretty close. They hang around $30 million. Holden is looking at $19 million. Maurepas $16 million. And Frost at $6 million. Now those are property values. Okay, so those are that 7 mil tax and that 5 mil construction fund. Both are attached to those property values. Now remember, those property values do not include the $75,000 of homestead exemption. So all those numbers are actually in reality less. The taxable value is much less in those districts. Now, here are the 5 extra millages that exist in Livingston Parish. Denham Springs has a 10.14 mil extra school construction fund, which has gone to Juban Park Elementary and Junior High. Excuse me. Walker has 8.19 mils, which went to North Corbin Elementary and Junior High, as well as 11.25 mils, which is how they got the new field, as well as buildings at Walker High School. All of that new stuff came from that 11.25 mils. Walker has 13.67 mils, which they've done a lot with, built a new high school, new stadiums, new ball fields, also renovated the old high school to be another junior high. That money's gone. That money's gone a long way. Maurepas has 12.07 mils. Now that's a tough situation. That's a post flood. Got to repair the school. Don't have the money in their funds. Got to go out and get it. After that, you have the 1.5 cent sales tax. So we've talked about 7 mils. We've talked about 5 mils and the property values they're attached to. We've also talked about extra millages, which have been bonded out to fund specific projects. What we haven't talked about is the 1.5 cent sales tax. The important designation about the 1.5 cent sales tax is wherever it was collected is where it stays. So obviously those 1.5 cents are going to favor places like Denham, Walker, Live Oak, or Watson, where that have larger commercial bases than anywhere else in the parish. Right now, I'm going to bring it up. There is no alcohol sales in Albany or Livingston. They'll be voting on that right now during early voting period, as well as on the ballot for the official runoff vote on November 16th. So it'll be interesting to see, but that will, of course, add money to their coffers. I don't know. That's a tough thing for a school board to get behind, but it would add money to their sales tax collection. But it is important to remember that 1.5 cent sales tax is a local tax collection for that school district where it was collected. It is then shipped to the school board, who is I guess you can say the official sales tax collection of record, and then it is distributed from there into the individual districts. So, from there, when you're talking about these schools in Denham Springs, you're talking about Southside Junior High and Elementary, as well as Denham Springs Elementary, anything that goes over the approved project scope of HUD and FEMA will be paid for out of the Denham Springs collection funds, right? So year over year, they hold about $7 million in funds. Here's an interesting example, though. There were folks from Albany, specifically several, who were commenting, what about us? What about us? Well, if you're looking at Albany's budget on a year-over-year basis, you're talking about the second sales tax. Remember, that's the two sales taxes combined, the 7 mil maintenance tax, and the construction fund. You're looking at roughly 2.87 million in collections a year. It breaks down like this. Second sales tax is about 1.7 million. 7 mil maintenance fund collects about 510,000, and the construction fund collects about 678,000. Unfortunately, the expenditures for Albany District come out to 2.85 million. So what that means is they actually only had a net gain fund balance of $20,000. That's not enough to build a new school. As you can be aware, bringing up the Southside Junior High and Elementary mega campus, that's $45 million. Denham Springs Elementary, probably when all said and done, $18 million. It's one elementary school. So we're talking about, just those collections alone to fund these districts is 1/9 of what you need just to build a new school. It may seem a little bit imbalanced, but with new regulations and things that we will get into towards the end of the cast, costs continue to go up. That's why people have to, that's why these districts individual districts run out and try to, pass these millages to bond out these monies, because otherwise it's nearly impossible to come up with the capital immediately to build new schools. It's just very difficult. So when you are looking at that, Albany holds about 1.9 to 2 million per year. Denham, as mentioned, holds about 7 million per year. There's two reasons for that. One is, for bond ratings, you have to have a certain amount of money in the bank, right, as collateral. So it helps if you have enough money in the bank to match, so that the bond ratings kind of go with the legislative auditor. According to the state, a governmental body must hold up to 12 months worth of operating capital in the event of a catastrophic disaster, the flood being one of them. If a hurricane comes through, that kind of thing, shuts down commerce, you still have to be able to operate. You got to be able to teach the kids, house the kids, that kind of thing. And you got to be able to pay for it. That came in real handy after the Great Flood, because the Denham Springs School District had about $7 million in the bank. And FEMA is more of the like now, where they reimburse. They do not pay for up front. So you've got to have that capital to start the project and keep it going. Now, you could get it started off with some capital, get reimbursed, and then continue to use that capital to keep it going along. But you still have to have the money to get it started. So again, Albany's got about $2 million in the bank. Denham's got about $7 million. Definitely helps during a disaster, and it helps your bond rating, and it's a requirement for these catastrophic disasters. It's a lot of the reasons why cities like Denham Springs have $25 million in the bank. Well, if you think about all the roads they'd have to repair, gas lines they'd have to fix, sewer lines, sewer treatment plant, all these things that would have to be repaired in the event of a catastrophic event, suddenly that number just goes up and up and up. In fact, $25 million might just be the seed money to bond out a bunch of cash to be able to fix everything immediately. Probably wouldn't go the distance. So, and of course FEMA would eventually pay them back, but it'd be reimbursed over time. Look at what's going on now. I mean, we're 3 years from the event. We're just starting to build these schools. We're 3 years from the event, and Denham Springs is just tearing down their old city hall, just now getting around to renovating their new one. These things take time, and you have to have capital to keep things going. Now, FEMA's involvement and those sorts of things are part of the reason why the cost of entry for these new schools continues to ratchet up. Part of the reason that the school system, the Denham Springs School Board, as well as the administrators at these schools, were able to come together and say, okay, we're going to go down this path. And they were, willing to work with FEMA and HUD to get these 100% funded, is because, again, it wouldn't have cost the system anything. And you get two fresh, brand new schools with all labor and project work all going into it. You're talking about almost $80 million in real estate. Now, is it free? No, there's no such thing as a free lunch, but it was at no cost, at no immediate cost to the system. And that was the big deal. And so in avoiding all that, they did have to jump through a lot of hoops. One is making sure that they meet base flood requirements. Now, in order for FEMA to pay for 90% of the school cost, they had to go 1 foot above base flood. For HUD to jump in, you got to go 2 feet up. This changes engineering requirements. It changes the amount of dirt you got to bring in, or the construction process. Again, they went down to South Plaquemine, which, if you don't know where that is, look at it on GPS. You're basically in the Gulf of Mexico. Those schools are built almost 12 feet off the ground after Katrina. So they learned from that. And Southside Mega Campus is going to be like that. It's going to be built way up high. Denham Springs Elementary is going to be built several feet in the air. It's also going to be 2 feet. So this requires more engineering costs. However, all of those costs did not even come close to the savings they had by working with certain entities and getting that last 10% covered. So it was important to the school system. We will talk about the process that the school system went through for Denham Springs Elementary and Southside Junior High and that sort of thing later. What's important to note about these things and what's coming out of Springfield and Albany at this time specifically, I know I keep mentioning them. There were a lot of folks that were commenting on our Facebook page about what about us, and they were from those areas. Doyle and French Settlement are in the same boat. Frost is in the same boat. Holden, all of those schools, none of them have extra millages. So they're working a lot on renovating what they've got, using what's left over in those tax collection funds. As we mentioned, Albany, out of that $2.87 million in their collections, a lot of that in their expenses for the year, which was $2.85, went towards massive renovations to classrooms, building giant wall space whiteboards and computer screens and that sort of thing. So, I mean, it's not that they're not spending the money appropriately. They're just choosing different projects because they don't have a millage. One of the reasons they don't have a millage is because in 2016, which has become a very difficult time for tax proposals and millage proposals, both school systems, that would be Springfield and Albany, had millage proposals on the ballot. They both failed. Now, there's a lot of controversy surrounding the Springfield one. Some folks have said that, they didn't have the option to vote on it, even though they lived in the district. Some folks have said that they were heavily reliant on only a few neighborhoods for the tax collection. So it's hard to say whether or not it was done fair. It's a lot of he said, she said. But it did fail. So here's what went down in the spring of 2016, and we all know what happened about 5 months later. In Albany, nearly 61% of the voters opposed the $13.4 million 20-year bond proposal for District 24. A total of 828 voters, 60.53%, rejected the plan, and 540, or 39.47%, approved it. Now, relatively low turnout, as spring elections have come to be. The opposition proved even stronger in Springfield, where 829 voters, 65.53%, nixed the $14.25 million 20-year bond. Only 436, 34.47% supported the measure. Now, those monies would probably not go the same distance after FEMA has kind of injected themselves in our community. As mentioned, it's going to be probably $18 million in total cost just for one elementary school. These were to go towards several schools. So the millage would probably have to be more, or it would have to be a 30-year bond. Again, Denham Springs Elementary is about 82,000 square feet in the campus, and 16 to 18 million. It's going to be almost 150,000 square feet for the mega campus on Southside, and we're talking 40 to 45 million. So schools have gotten expensive, and a lot of that we talked about. We were talking about elevation, FEMA requirements. Those things just add to the cost of these schools. So it's very hard to build large buildings now. You have to go through a lot of requirements. Even if you're not dealing with post-disaster and you're trying to get reimbursed, there's still a lot of parish ordinances you have to follow, disaster ordinances you have to follow, because you're going to have, especially if it's bonded out, it's going to have to be insured. There's a lot of regulation that has come out consistently year over year since the flood, which ratchets up that cost. Now, for those of you in Springfield, there are several folks who have reached out to me after this story was published and here at the news, looking for support, who are trying to try this millage over again. Maybe be a little more upfront about where the money's going, trying to get everybody on board for paying for it, that sort of thing. But this has been resurrected. Of course, Springfield flooded, as did a lot of schools here in Livingston Parish. They did not receive a substantial damage designation, so they went in, they had their money on hand, they started the process to renovate and rehab, got reimbursed, and moved on with life. But now there are folks who are looking to revisit this millage proposal and try to see if they can't do something better. A lot of it, if you're watching this and you're interested about it, you need to contact your school board member from your area. A lot of it goes through them. A lot of these choices go through them. Of course, they are in touch with administrators within those systems and have constant conversations about what's best for those systems. But it's important, if you're a resident in these areas and you're looking for new school construction, talking to these school administrators and talking to these school board members is your best way of moving towards a new campus, new school building, those sorts of things. But as mentioned, so let's go right back to the beginning and go through it again real quick. You have 3 sources of funding for each individual district plus Frost. You're looking at sales tax collection, which is what's called the second sales tax. It's 1.5 cents, which favors the west side of the parish. It just does. There's a lot of there's more commercial development there in the Watson, Walker, and Denham Springs area, so they're collecting a lot more than the other areas are. There's a 7 mil maintenance fund as well as a 5 mil construction fund. So if you don't have an extra millage, like Walker has 2, Maurepas has 1, Live Oak has 1, and Denham has 1, then a lot of times you're not going to have enough money for new school construction because, as we discussed, those costs are going up. Just as to recap that example, Albany collects $2.87 million from those funds every year and has an expense category of about $2.85. So you're only looking at a $20,000 net gain on a fund where you have to keep about that much money anyway, which would be what was left over, about $1.97 million for catastrophic events and stuff like that. So there you have it. A lot of numbers there, a lot of tax collection. Just remember, if you live in one of those areas that was discussed that doesn't have a millage and you're looking for a new school, you're probably going to have to absorb a millage to get a new school. This is all based on hyper-local tax collection. It comes straight out of the financial reports from the school board. Of course, you can call the school board and ask them those questions. You can also talk to your school board member and request those documents as well. Again, my name is McHugh David, publisher and editor of the news. Appreciate you joining us for this podcast on how schools are constructed here in Livingston Parish. It is important to remember that Louisiana is one of the states that does not have a dedicated new school construction fund. So it's entirely based on the title of the story, if you're watching the video, is the voter's choice. And it is in fact the choice of those communities about whether or not they will pass an extra millage and bond it out to build new schools. If you were listening to that, it's the voter's choice. So thank you one more time for joining us here for the Livingston Parish Weekly Podcast. We've started to grow to where we're putting out 3, 4, 5 of them a week. We hope you're enjoying them. We're going to talk next time about the journey that the school board took to make it so that these $80 million worth of new schools in Denham Springs didn't cost the school system more than a few million if they wanted anything over what FEMA and HUD had approved. Hope you'll join us for that. Also shot the football show just a little while ago, about an hour ago. We'll be pushing that out tomorrow. This is coming out Wednesday, November 6th. We hope you have a great day. Thanks for joining us.